Welcome back to the WorkWeek special program from Ferguson to the Bay Area. And we're continuing the special 4-hour programming on the connection between what's going on in Ferguson to the situation with working people and youth in the Bay Area, Northern California. And joining us on this program are Adriana Camarena. She's with the Justice for Alex Nieto Committee in San Francisco. So Jonathon Melrod, who is an attorney, with a lawyer in Santa Rosa and representing Nieto Serrano Garcia. And also he's a member of the California Advisory on Civil Rights. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Adriana and I have spoken, and we've crossed paths because we're involved in the same struggle. I actually represent, Andy Lopez, who was killed up here exactly a year ago. He was a 13-year-old boy carrying a toy gun, and the officer unloaded his weapon on him, claiming that he feared for his life, that it might have been an AK. I represent Adriana Serrano, who was a mentally disabled 18-year-old woman down in Half Moon Bay, who was killed just feet from her family's house when, rather than sending 911 emergency help, they sent a lone officer who disobeyed all protocol and went after her on his own, as well as Oscar Herrera, who was killed while in his mother's arms in Dublin by the police, and other victims here. So, what we're seeing and what we're experiencing is an epidemic. This has really become an epidemic of police killing brown and black people and, on occasion, other white people in, what's really become a militarized police state in America. There's been $5.5 billion worth of military hardware transferred from the Department of Defense to local police departments all through the country under the program 1033. And that transfer of military hardware hasn't just been the equipment, it's been the mentality. There's a mentality now of us versus them, that the police are an occupation force in communities of color. And we're just seeing that so blatantly right now in Ferguson, where it's focused on the Afro-American community. But here in California, we've seen it focused very much on the Latino community, on the brown community. And here, when they shot Andy Lopez, the officer said, well, I was in a gang-banging neighborhood, and I saw a kid, carrying what I thought was an AK-47, and after all my tours of duty in Iraq, I felt like that posed a danger, and I couldn't wait for backup because an AK bullet will penetrate my car and my body armor. Well, let's be realistic. Who's ever seen a 13-year-old boy walking down the street carrying an AK-47, swinging it like it was a feather? That's just, the whole scenario smacks of, war mentality. And that's exactly what happened. The deputy jumped out of his car, and within 10 seconds, he had fired 7 rounds into Andy's body, and Andy died on the ground. And as it turned out, the autopsy that the state did was all a bunch of lies, and in the end, the DA used the autopsy that had been conducted independently by the family. And it really showed that Andy was just beginning to turn around because the deputy had yelled, didn't even identify himself as a police officer, yelled, hey, drop the gun. And Andy turned to see who was yelling at him, and before he could face the officer, he was dead. And then, of course, similarly with Alejandro in San Francisco, the first narrative was, well, Andy was a gangbanger, Andy was a bad kid. Well, it turned out that Andy played trumpet in the school band, wouldn't join Norteño or Serrano, didn't believe in it, and befriended every kid. So as usual, they immediately tried to blame the victim, which is the pattern that we're witnessing all over. And until we put a stop to this on a national level, people are just going to continue to get massacred like they are right now, yesterday, or the day before, once again in St. Louis.
And we're speaking with Jonathon Melrod. He's a lawyer in Santa Rosa who's been representing a number of youth and others who've been killed. Well, what is the circumstance? Because it seems that the police are getting off scot-free in Santa Rosa and other places. Seems to be no accountability. That it seems like they're being told it's okay to do this. These kinds of things.
More than being told that it's okay, if I can take this answer because I am a lawyer, although I say so reluctantly, I consider myself an activist who happens to have a law degree. But what's happened is that the state of the law has developed so that any officer can claim fear for his or her life or fear for the life of somebody in the public and justify a shooting. And the standard that's being used is that officer only has to articulate a objectively reasonable fear. An objectively reasonable fear can mean just about anything. In Yanira Serrano's case, it meant that Yanira was 5 foot, over 200 pounds, and had a disabled leg from birth. She weighed so much because she was schizophrenic and her meds had caused her to gain weight. She couldn't run as fast as, an older person. Yet that officer in Half Moon Bay claimed that the paring knife that she had been using to cut fruit that was in her hand caused him to fear for his life. As if he, a trained officer, couldn't run, taser, call in backup, do something else but take her life. And the DA exonerated him. And that justification has really become a green light all over the country. And what we've got to do is, I think, twofold. We've got to demilitarize the police across this country. We've got to warehouse military equipment and get it off our streets. And there has to be a much, much higher standard where human life is placed in a position of value, and then an officer has to take into account, and this is what the Ninth Circuit had said at an earlier point, our federal court, that the entire circumstance have to be considered, not just the, quote, mental state of the officer. His mental state has to be justified by the objective circumstance. So, there's a lot of work we've got to do on the legal level. But, I learned when I've been in the Philippines on recent trips, and I participated with the political prisoners there in the Philippines. They operate on 2 legs. One is called the Parliament of the Streets, which means demonstrations, sit-ins, civil disobedience, taking the matter into the streets, and the other is the Parliament, which means going in to the courts, the city council, the county board of supervisors, and the elected officials, and force some real change that can make systemic change so that our youth aren't facing daily fear for their lives on our city streets.
And isn't it the case that the police officer that killed your client, Andy Lopez, had actually written in magazines, military hardware magazines, that how to get out of accusations of murder of people?
Well, that's exactly, you're exactly correct. Let me just give you a quick profile, and I'll be brief because I feel like I'm dominating the conversation. But a quick profile, this was a veteran officer of 20-some years, 20-plus years, Deputy Galhouse. He had served as a marksman trainer for the police here in Sonoma County. Recently, he had volunteered for 2 tours of duty in Iraq. In other words, it wasn't enough for him to police the streets in the U.S. He needed to get his kill zone in the war in Iraq. And he also and this is very interesting, trained in the state of New Mexico at a camp that was founded by white supremacists. And the white supremacist who's now dead who founded that camp has writings that are on the internet. And one of his writings said, we need to give the Latino community in Los Angeles more bullets so they can kill each other. And this is the kind of mentality. Deputy Gelhaus had a bumper sticker on his car. That bumper sticker took the bumper sticker that we see up here that says coexist and says coexist in the language of Hindi, Spanish, English, Hebrew, Arabic. It's a bumper sticker of unity. And he had transferred a bullseye onto that sticker. And he had written in SWAT magazine that any officer confronted with a young person with a BB gun should know to say that he fears for his life as his legal defense. So he had written his defense years before he shot Andy. It was as if he was waiting to be able to implement the defense that he had already articulated in print. That's going to go to trial in Oakland in federal court, probably next October or November. And we're going to put that on trial, those writings, that mentality, that officer talking about when you have to shoot, go for the kill zone, which meant when he executed Andy, the first shot, the very first shot of 8, penetrated Andy's heart and killed him. The other 8 shots were to make sure dead witnesses can't testify. And I believe that was the same with Alejandro. When every one of those officers opened up on Alejandro, they wanted to make sure that he wouldn't live to testify about the fact that he was eating a burrito on his dinner break rather than doing anything criminal or amiss. And that's the mentality. Make sure you don't leave a witness behind who can testify.
So thank you. That's Jonathon Melrod, and he's an attorney representing a number of clients who have been murdered and faced very bad conditions. And also joining us is Adriana Camarena, who is with the Justice for Alex Nieto Committee. Why don't you talk about that case and another real gross attack on democratic rights in San Francisco, in Bernal Heights. People talk about Bernal Heights, but it seems like there's a war on the Latino people in Bernal Heights.
Yes, especially if you also talk about gentrification in the context of what happened to Alex Nieto, then you see that the Latino community is certainly in a war zone in whether it's housing or as climax in the case of Alex, around their own lives, when they're seen as strangers in their own neighborhood. As you all know, Heights, like the Mission, have been traditionally working class neighborhoods. Since the 60s, they were a growing majority of Latinos. And with a rapid decline in the last years, with gentrification, primarily fueled by Silicon Valley workers who are moving from the neighborhood through assisted through a series of evictions fabricated by real estate speculators. So I'm just giving this context because on March 21st of this year, when Alejandro Nieto, who lived his entire life on Bernal Heights, went out as he usually did for a walk to Bernal Heights, for a jog, to walk his dog, and in this case, to enjoy the sunset. I don't know if you've ever been up on Bernal Heights at sunset, but it's glorious. It's beautiful. And I remember that day. I actually heard the shots from my home. I live in the Mission. And it was a clear, beautiful day. There wasn't any fog. You could see all the way down over to the Golden Gate. And so Alex is enjoying a meal on a bench looking towards Twin Peaks when a dog walker goes by and doesn't like what he looks like. And so he calls 911. He stands downhill from Alejandro and calls 911 and reports a tall Latino male wearing a red jacket and a handgun at his hip. This is about 7:11 p.m. And so he provides this description, which you can hear actually is repeated on dispatch later. And he stays on the line. And at 7:14, the caller, still on the line, awaiting for the police to arrive, describes Alejandro eating sunflower seeds or chips. I'm mentioning this because I want you to help me identify what the threat was that police responded to. So by 7:18 p.m., the same caller who remains on the line describes shots fired. During the time that he describes Alejandro eating, Alejandro walks downhill towards the entrance of the park. At that moment, police officers confronted him from 75 feet away. And I'm giving you information that's been provided by the same officers and now by eyewitnesses also. We now have learned from eyewitnesses in the information provided in the lawsuit filed by the offices of John Burris, and specifically Dante Pointer is the lead attorney on this. The police rush forward up the hill and in the patrol cars, and from 75 feet away, they shoot Alejandro. But first,
From 75 feet away.
75 feet away. But now I'm going to tell you police version of events and the lawsuit version of events. So in police version of events, the police confront him and tell him to show us your hands. And Alejandro supposedly says, "No, you show me your hands." And then the police shoot him because he doesn't comply to the orders. Now, eyewitness and ear witness reports say that what actually happened was that Alejandro was confronted from 75 feet away. They rush out of their cars and they just yell, "Stop!" And immediately, shots are fired. So once again, like in the case of Andy Lopez, there's absolutely no opportunity to respond. Then the police, there's a pause. And then after a pause of like 6 seconds, and there's audio recording of this, you can find it on our website under Alex's story. There's a series of volley of shots. You can hear about at least 10 more shots. Or there's a little bit of an echo off the hill. It could be up to 14, 15 shots. So this is where I agree with Jonathon that what happens at these moments is the police, once they see that they've illegally shot a person, they just volley the person with shots so that you can't actually determine what was the shot that killed Alejandro. It makes it much more difficult. Now, I want you to understand something else. Alejandro Nieto had just completed his studies in administration of justice at City College. He was interning as in the probation department with youth because he wanted to help youth. He was a constant volunteer at community organizations in the mission, like Coleman Advocates, who've spoken up for Alejandro. And he was also a Buddhist since a teenager. He was all around a peaceful, culturally savvy, intellectual young man, 28 years old. And they want to say that someone who actually, as a profession, was studying police protocols, confronted police in this manner. It's unbelievable. It's an impossible version of events to believe.
So this committee was formed, and what was the response of the police department? I understand there was even trouble getting the autopsy and finding out what happened. You've had a whole struggle to just get the information about this incident.
And this is also keep in mind also what happened in Ferguson, no? 5 months after Alejandro was killed, we didn't have the names of the officers. The chief of police in the town hall meeting said there were 4 officers. Now we realize there were many more on scene. Maybe 4 officers shot guns, but there were many more on scene.
So he lied, Gaskin lied about the number of officers there.
Conveniently left out information, didn't he? So we still don't know the name of the 4 officers. We still don't know how many shots were actually fired, which is easily ascertainable from just knowing how many bullets were fired from the guns involved. They could have provided that information. We don't know where the officers are stationed now because they're back on duty. They've been administratively absolved of the situation. And we didn't get the autopsy report until near 6 months after Alejandro died. And this was after Ferguson. And I'm bringing up Ferguson because what happened in Ferguson is because people in Ferguson organized in a massive and deliberate act of civil disobedience and peaceful protest, that they got a political response. The politicians responded with saying, what was the name of the officer involved? And in a few days, I think it was within a week, they got the autopsy report.
That's right.
And I think because Ferguson is now on people's mind and it is highlighting what happens in these cases, is that we finally got the autopsy report.
So you were able to get it in part as a result of Ferguson, in your view.
In my view, yes. And I think it's big because there hadn't been enough pressure. We've created enough pressure around Alex, but here again, in honor of Alex, who was somebody who actually believed in defending his rights. I've often talked to his parents and his mom. Is like, no, Alejandro would have exercised his rights. We've been carrying out civil, peaceful protests in his name. We've gotten our permits. We've done everything we can do by the book to get a response from authorities. But the message I get is that unless there's civil disobedience, authorities don't care. They do not respond.
So they'll just ignore it unless it's impossible to ignore.
Unless it's impossible to ignore. And so also, in the meantime, 5 months later, the only option the family has to get any information about what happened to Alejandro, and it's after the federal civil lawsuit is filed that we finally get the autopsy report also.
So the police department could have released the autopsy report.
The autopsy report is, and even by the same information, was done the day after Alejandro is killed.
So they could have released it.
They could have released it.
They withheld it.
They withheld it. And I mean, I'm not an expert, of course, in autopsies, but if you just read the autopsy, it's 14 to 15 bullet wounds caused by at least 10 bullets.
And now they're saying that he had a taser.
Let's
and
talk about the taser.
That was a threat to their lives, and that's why they had to fire 14 to 15 bullets at him.
Let's talk about that. And I'm going to let you guys decide what happened. So police say that when they confront Alejandro and tell him to show us your hands, and he doesn't, he then lifts his taser, which these trained police officers confuse for a gun. And tasers are marked, especially with yellow markings, so as to not be confused. They're 75 feet away. Tasers do not reach 75 feet away, okay? So they say that Alejandro raises his taser. That's why they shoot him. That's like first two shots. Then there's a pause. They say that on the ground, having already been shot, he raises and tracks the officers. This is on the town hall meeting accounts. Raises his taser and tracks the officer. They don't say he shoots the taser. Tracks the officers with the taser. And that's why they shoot him over 15 times. So that's what they say. But now what eyewitnesses are saying is that Alejandro, first of all, had no chance to respond because it was such an he was immediately shot, and that he never made any movement to raise or touch his taser.
So they're lying about what happened.
They're lying about what happened. And I believe that police created a version of events thinking there weren't any witnesses. Because they had the hill surrounded. They controlled the crime scene, right? The witness probably fled. Imagine what a horrifying thing to witness and be afraid of being a witness to a police shooting. So They have the hill surrounded. They control the crime scene. The paramedics only, from what I read in the medical examiner's report, they only arrive until, still 15 minutes later to try to revive Alejandro. They still handcuffed him. After they shoot him, they handcuffed him.
So he was shot that many times, and they handcuffed him after he was shot about eight or nine times.
Michael Brown too.
Yeah, well, Michael Brown,
Yeah.
same kind of treatment. I mean,
So
they
imagine
left
the
him laying in
body
the
is
street.
moved, right? The body's moved. Their crime scene is altered. They now are they're suggesting that the taser was discharged. I'm like, what? Because a bullet hit it? What is the situation here? So it's their version of events is full of lies. I want to create like a police lie tracker because they were probably going to keep on shifting their story as they realize that they've been caught in a lie. So also what happens in these cases, and it's happened in absolutely every case, is that the first thing the police do is that once they murder a citizen, a civilian, the next thing they do is murder his character, which is exactly what happened to Alejandro Nieto also.
Yeah, the demonization process.
Absolutely.
Now, the issue of Bernal Heights gentrification, we had an earlier segment about working people being driven out of their homes, and this has been going on. House flippers in San Francisco, speculators coming in, and use of eviction laws to drive people who were born in San Francisco, lived all their lives in San Francisco. How does this play in what happened, do you think, in Alex's murder?
First of all, let's consider how was Alejandro viewed? I don't think any of the people moving into the neighborhood who are making entry salaries of $120,000 a year understand what it is to have to be a young man who's a full-time student and a full-time security guard on his break before going to work, dressed for work, wearing his taser, wearing his work pants. He was wearing his 49ers jacket. I think it was the time the 49ers were doing well. He's not even wearing baggy pants because he's wearing his security guard pants. And I've seen a photo of Alex on his birthday wearing his red jacket. And it's actually a very, elegant red 49ers jacket. And he was wearing his baseball cap. So
It was very threatening.
he was very threatening. And there's a man, a last name Bullard, who walks his dog right by when Alex is still up on the bench eating. And he says that he wasn't threatening to him at all. Yeah, he also kind of, we might not know the difference between a taser or a gun. He said, maybe, I also thought it was a gun. But he says he was just a guy eating a burrito. And he says that he was, I've talked to Bullard and he says that, I would have, I was almost going to say hey to him or I would, caught his attention and say something to him. But then what happened is that his dog, Alex, was eating. So dogs, I don't know if you've ever tried to eat at a park. The dogs are incredible. They just come right up to you, And so he says his dog went for Alex's burrito. And he said, oh, come on. And so he said that changed the dynamic. And then he just didn't talk to him. And he kept on going home. By the time he was further down the hill, Alejandro was dead. And, it's a heavy thing to just think that it's just a comment, a question. Hey, how you doing, neighbor, But no, this person who saw him had to see him as profile him. And I don't want to make this, I'm going to assume this is a new person to the neighborhood. We still don't know because we have not even gotten the 911 original call. They have not even released that.
And that's done normally very quickly. You get the 911 call. I mean,
do you remember the case of George Zimmerman? We heard that 911 call immediately.
Right. That's right. So the police department against the chief Gascon is refusing to release the 911
We
call.
don't even have the 911 call.
Information.
We have a narrated a version of the 911 call by Chief Greg Suhr from the town hall meeting. That's all we have.
So it sounds like they're just playing hardball and we're not going to give you anything. And this is the liberal San Francisco Police Department. Progressive San Francisco Police Department.
And then I want to point something else out, and I think I know why they're hiding. And it's if you realize, I mean, the place where Alex was shot is on an uphill. It's actually kind of an uphill, and Alex was standing right here when the police come up to him. So, in theory, when they shoot him, the shots should be going upward. The vast majority of all the lethal shots mentioned in the autopsy are downward. They shot him when he was already down on the ground. There's a direct downward shot to his temple. That's an execution.
So who were these officers?
We don't know.
You still don't know who the
They
officers
will not
are?
give us the names of the officers. We have gone to the police commissioner to demand, the police commission, when they meet, to demand the names of the officers.
That's a state secret. And the politicians in San Francisco? I mean, the members of the Board of Supervisors?
Let's talk about the politicians. Mayor Ed Lee hasn't even extended a condolences to the family. There's some information that Michael Petrelis asked for through a Freedom of Information Act. And it says that they had drafted a letter. They never sent it. And now the mayor's office is saying that they gave the Nieto family, there's a report saying that they gave the Nieto family money for their funeral expenses. The funeral expenses were covered by the family. This is not a wealthy family. This is a family who the father was a manual worker all his life. And Alex's mom, until May 1st, this was her planned retirement, May 1st. You know how it's symbolic for labor. That was her first day of retirement. And from a housekeeping job in a downtown hotel of 29 years. And Alex's brother is also a working class young man, also was a security guard. He's now moving away from those jobs because it's really hard for him to just hold that job that he used to hold with his brother. But they're your hardworking Latino family, parents, first-generation immigrants, and kids born and raised here in San Francisco.
So it's a bad sign for working class people, Latinos, blacks, African Americans in San Francisco to get this kind of treatment.
And absolutely, and think about it, the majority of these police shootings are people who are poor or are part of low-income communities. And who are these people normally? Are people who are minorities. So it's black folk, it's Latino folk, it's also Asian folk, a variety of folks, even white folks. I would say that the majority are people who are part of low-income communities. So the question I often raise is, what is it that police protect? And it's an important question to ask if we're actually going to think about what we're going to do with police. And there's a definition I found online, and you say police is a constituted body of persons authorized by the state to enforce the law, protect property,
That's a key word there.
and limit civil disobedience. So who or what does police actually protect as a body, as an authority? It's not going to be the people who with property, let me tell you.
And the wealthy who are coming into San Francisco.
The wealthy who are coming to San
and
Francisco.
buying these homes and kicking out working class
And
people.
also to intimidate and instill fear in the
This is
various
a
communities.
warning to poor people,
Yeah.
to black people, Latino people. This is what happens, and they get away with it. And the fact that the city has not done anything except cover up the information is pretty brazen, really. I mean, so you've had some marches. What can people do who want to support your case and defend and get the
Absolutely.
information out?
Well, we do have an ongoing petition for a federal investigation to the case of Alejandro Nieto. We've actually requested formally. We went to the offices of the FBI and also the local offices of the Attorney General here in Northern California to request a federal investigation to the case of Alejandro. And let me tell you why it's particularly important in this case. Because the only person who can bring criminal charges, as we know in the case of Alejandro Nieto, at least at a local level, is the local DA, in this case, George Gascon. George Gascon is the former chief of police of San Francisco, and he's a career police officer, 30 years or so on the force. So where does this leave us when in his exit he left Greg Suhr in charge of the police department? This should have been by the books. And if I have a policy choice, I say that all police investigations should be handled by an independent ombudsman, a complete different prosecutor, different from the district attorney. I can't imagine how you can get an independent investigation to these cases where you decide, we have to decide whether an officer fired their weapon legally or illegally, whether the threat was real or fabricated. This is the constant issue. They investigate themselves.
And it seems also they're not even releasing information which has been released in other cases about the incident. I mean, that's very clear evidence of an effort to cover things up and hope people go away. But you're not going away. You've had marches, you're continuing to organize, and you're connecting now this with Ferguson and what's going on in other cases throughout California.
Absolutely. And just as a final invitation, we always meet on Bernal Hill at the site where Alex was killed every 21st of the month. So you're all welcome to join us. Also, this
At what time?
Sunset, of course. When from 6 to 7, we're there. Maybe we usually linger a little bit depending on the weather. But you're all welcome. We've had poetry readings, we've had vigils, we've had educators for Alex. There have been a variety of community support that we always welcome. And this next anniversary for Alex in October coincides with October 22nd, which, as we know, is the National Day Against Police Brutality. So we'll be sure to include folks who want to speak to that issue.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us today and making a real connection from the Bay Area to Ferguson, because the treatment, it seems, is very similar
It's
to what
very
happened
similar.
to Michael Brown. I mean,
The only difference is Holder went to Ferguson and started an investigation. But that's because the whole world was watching.
But it seems in San Francisco there's no outcry, and that basically he's being treated as a deadly threat to the police. You know, and let's cover up and not release the autopsy, not release all this information, even though it
There
it
has
should be
been
released.
outcry. There has been a lot of outcry. We've done a lot of protests from the moment he died until the last anniversary. We've been out there. And let me tell you, all sorts of folk on Bernal Heights come around and express deep sorrow about what happened. So I think there's a greater concern of a variety of people about what happened to Alejandro. But this is a case where politicians don't feel the pressure. And so they don't do anything about it.
And your website?
It's justiceforalexnieto.org, and it's 4 as the number 4, justiceforalexnieto.org. And write to us if you want to participate or help us out. We always welcome art or whatever people have in mind. We're open to your ideas and your help, so please come
Okay,
around.
well, thank you very much for coming and talking about this case and the very important connection it has today on the mass march and anniversary, or the action in Ferguson, Missouri.
Yes, and if I may do a little plug-in, we have 2 altars going on here for Day of the Dead, as you know, very important for the Latino community, but they get set up in October. And so Elvira, Refugio, which are Alex's parents, and a few collaborating artists, we just set up a beautiful altar in his honor at Somarts. So come around and check that out. And there's also one around police brutality in San Francisco that's going to be up at the Mission Cultural Center as of next week. So
Thank you very much for coming and talking about this case and the very important connection it has today on the mass march and the action in Ferguson, Missouri.
yes, and if I may do a little plug-in, we have 2 altars going on here for Day of the Dead, as you know, very important for the Latino community, but they get set up in October. And so Elvira, Refugio, which are Alex's parents and a few collaborating artists, we just set up a beautiful altar in his honor at Somarts. So come around and check that out. And there's also one around police brutality in San Francisco that's going to be up at the Mission Cultural Center as of next week. So come around.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.